Hello, everybody, and welcome to another evening with us. Thank you very much for joining us. If there is ever a slight silence as I start these, it's just as we wait for the live stream to kick in. But thank you, as ever, for joining us. We're going to be taking you to North Devon, and specifically, we're going to be talking black and white, and we're going to have a few cool features tonight. And Adrian is going to show us some things actually to do with editing, along with talking about the images and the usual chats that we do. But firstly, Adrian, good evening.
Hello, how are you? How are you, Sam? And how's everyone else back at home?
Back at home.
Hopefully
I
good.
am good. It's very sunny here in Dorset. You've beaten me on your screensaver again with the lovely black and white. And
Has to be done.
if anyone out there would like to let us know where you are watching from, that is always much appreciated. And like ever, we will be here to take any questions and answer any queries you might have about any of the images and or about some of the editing. So as I've mentioned, for anyone that's joining us a little bit later, we are going to do a couple of quick edits. So we're going to look at black and white editing, and Adrian's going to talk about some pertinent points to do with that as well. But without any further ado, let's get into it, Adrian. If we can just set the scene for where we are, because obviously
Yeah.
this evening we're talking about images specifically, but they're based around a tour Adrian runs in North Devon. So just give us a little bit of the geography first, if you can.
Yeah, so North Devon is probably only about 40 miles as the crow flies from kind of the eastern end to the western end. It starts out up in Exmoor, up near Linton Limit, around about there. The county boundary sort of crosses through Exmoor, and then heads on down through. I guess Barnstable's kind of the centre of where the main estuary comes out from the Tor and the Torridge, from Bideford as well. They kind of come together and come out into the offshore coast and heading out towards Lundy, 12 miles, kind of 12 miles out there. That's all part of our little territory here. And then we head down the coast a little bit more towards Hartland. And finally, we sort of hit the Cornish border just before Bude, just at the western end. And so it's not very long. I say if you fly it, it would be pretty quick, considerably shorter than the South Devon coast actually. But I heard only the other day on a TV program that Devon is the only English county with two coastlines and two national parks. So how about that? Wonderful.
You are
So,
winning in lots of ways, as we're going to find out tonight.
but it is lovely. I was very lucky to be brought up in pretty much in Devon. So North Devon, I spent my childhood in doing my O levels and going through secondary school. So I was here for only about 5 years, but then came back again more recently. So just coming up to 5 years ago actually. And it's well, I'm sure everybody would say the same about their own patch of turf, but I think it's probably one of the most lovely places in the UK to be. You know, we are blessed, as we will see, with some amazing coastline, which is both dramatic and rugged, but also has huge stretches of sand as well. So we've got a nice combination.
Yeah, definitely. And variety is the big key here. Variety, even coastal variety, which is not something you always see a great deal of on the British coast in one location. But I think Adrian's really picked on an area here which has a lot of opportunities. So just hello to everyone that's coming in. We've got Northumberland, Bexhill, Devon, North Cornwall, a couple from North Cornwall. Jez, also a fellow Dorchester chap here, Liverpool calling. So welcome everyone along. And if you are just joining us, Adrian and I are going to walk through some of his images from the North Devon coast, specifically thinking about black and white, although there's a couple of colours in there. We're going to try and engage you. We've got some great polls for those watching live. There's a few polls you can take part in, depending on your device. And also, Adrian is going to get into some editing. A couple of edits we're going to do very quickly just to show some little Lightroom techniques, and we may well have a question about that later. But you've mentioned, Adrian, there geographically, the sort of route we're taking, and I am going to, for those watching, there's an extremely pertinent question. If you can see the polls, which I'm about to put out there, and this one is very, very important, and it's to do with how you take your cream tea. We've got Devon or we've got Cornish style. But whilst the public are voting on that, Do tell us, everyone. Adrian, if you can start us geographically where we are, and this is a rare color image, but I know you wanted to sort of set that scene.
Well, yeah, so this is kind of up in the eastern end, so that we're right on the edge of Exmoor here, right on the coastline, and this is probably most people will have heard of Valley of Rocks, not Valley of the Rocks. I had my knuckles wrapped by a local when I first called it that, but and this is just up on the top. It's very easy to access. It's a beautiful dry valley. It's a ice carved out valley that heads right down to the water's edge. We've got a beautiful cliff edge that rises and then drops suddenly straight down into the water. It's very, very dramatic. Lots of granite, and it's just very picturesque. But it's pretty big, and it's quite a tricky place to take an image. This is an iPhone image, and very straightforward. But it's really an interesting opportunity because the iPhone, certainly the newer iPhones, have these very wide lenses. So this particular one uses the built-in 13mm super wide lens.
Wow. Okay. And we're going to talk about lens choice and wide lenses and even a bit of iPhone. I'm glad you mentioned that because I know you do a couple of light and land iPhone things, but it's a really, it's the best camera is the camera you have on you, obviously. But these days, especially, there's a lot of ability to shoot in that way. I'm going to just briefly tell you, bad news. That 69% are going Cornish with their cream tea. Adrian,
No.
what do you say to that?
You mean wrong, not Cornish. Yeah, you got to get the cream on first, and then if there's any room, then you could put a bit of jam on. That's okay.
Well, I just thought we'd share with a nice, light-hearted one. There will be some more serious ones later. I'm sorry, and a really crazy one here from Jez. He votes for Thunder and Lightning. That's cream.
Yeah,
first.
Thunder and Lightning. Yeah, good.
Golden syrup.
Nice choice.
Madness. Everyone's screaming to start talking about photos. So sorry, everyone. Let's get into it. So black and white. Hey, I mean, I know you obviously for your black and white work and your knowledge of also editing and storage and the technicals and printing actually as well. But I always think of you with black and white. So, I mean, before we just get into some of these images, tell us or tell the audience, what is it about black and white for you?
It's really tricky. I guess it's because I like to play with the images. I like to work with the images, and black and white just kind of encourages that. It's fun. I enjoy photography. I enjoy the process of working with images. And I just find that, I suppose, black and white seem to be that much more malleable. They're more, you're more able to work with the tones than you perhaps might do with color. Color kind of leads you down the path of saying, well, this is about, it's about the place, it's realism. The black and white is kind of, fake from the start, if you like. The world isn't black and white. So you're already starting in a place where you've kind of been given license, if you like, to be a bit more creative. And I enjoy that. That's the kind of photography I enjoy. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but for me, that really works. I guess I'm also, I know Paul Sanders says you just can't do color. And I think I would kind of have to agree with that to some extent too. The color work that I've done, I've just find that hard to get excited by. And that's probably because I'm just not very good at it. But I find with the black and white, it's much more engages me, and I really enjoy the working with it. So yeah, it just kind of has that element of opportunity to work with it and play with the images.
And when you get this nice, light and contrast and everything else, I would imagine that's, as you've mentioned, you can take that even further. And we're going to talk about that a little bit when we're getting into the edits in terms of helping people through the frame. That's something you're really keen on, right? Yeah,
definitely. And I think, obviously, there are other types of photography as well. We talked about, here we're looking at landscapes. And I think at the beginning of the series, Joe Cornish said, well, not very many people like landscape photography. Not many people do it. And your poll last week, I think, kind of said not many people do black and white. So we really are in a niche of a niche. But I think images, black and white images just really sort of really work for me. They really help me to sort of play. So we can work on the image more perhaps than we would do with color. We can lead you through, finding where's the subject, where's not the subject, emphasize, de-emphasize. And with architecture, which I also love in black and white, very commonly we will invent the light. We'll put the light where we want it to be. will play with the light. So if there isn't much light around, if it's a flat grey day, actually some of those are the best opportunities.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, because I would imagine some people, we're going to talk about purism and expressionism a little bit maybe as well later on. And I'm conscious of the fact we've not really talked about this image, but so just very briefly, and then we'll move on to the next one, Adrian.
So yeah, so we're still in Valley of Rocks, just probably a little bit further down the hillside, and looking at the outcrop here. So just kind of heading out looking down towards Heartland, really. So we're looking in a westerly direction, and that's the route that we're going to be traveling. And actually, this road takes us on to the next location, which is just tucked in behind on the left shoulder of the hill there. So we'll be heading in that direction next.
And here we are. And
here we are. And
yeah.
I like to call this Lee Abbey Bay, but actually it's just called Lee Bay. But it's right by Lee Abbey. There is another Lee Bay which we'll be visiting as well in a few photos time. And it has like many of the locations, sort of several characters which happen at different times of day. Which I think is one of the great things about the coastline. If we go to other areas of the countryside, then they may have autumnal or summer or spring characters and so on, but actually very often the beaches it's twice a day. It changes its character completely twice a day. Plus then you throw in the storms and so on. So they can be very, very different places. This is near to high tide, and these are very large slabs that project out into the ocean here. And quite a lot of people come here and surf. There's also a little place you can stay on the little place you can rent just literally to my right. This particular bay has some really lovely elements to it. On the right hand side, so on the eastern side, it's flanked by some large flat boulders which are very photogenic, particularly used for in long exposures such as these. They work rather well. But the bay is small enough and compact enough for you to be able to get a little bit of the headland in both sides. I think this is probably a 16mm shot, actually, this one, but you can get both headlands in. Once that water goes out, though, you're presented with a large expanse of sand, which you can then walk out quite some way and around the headland to the left into the next bay. So it becomes a very different location once the sea recedes.
Adrian, if I can just put you, we just had a question come in from Juliet, which is, what filters did you use for the black and white? And so I think there's probably a couple of things going on here, because we've got long exposure on this particular image, but also let's pick up on filters in terms of using reds or oranges and whatnot in camera or physical. What's your general setup, if I can? And I may just flick to the next image.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with film, the red filter pretty much lived on my camera, but with film, with digital, we don't really need to worry about that in the same way. So the contrast can be achieved in the processing stage. So I don't necessarily try to do that in camera, but obviously, yes, a big stopper or even a super stopper, those are the two filters that typically you'll be carrying around, often because of the you'll be out during the day. So, I really like black and white very much because you can shoot all day long. It's less, I think it's less dependent on the nature of the sun being present or not. In these, many of these would be actually pretty grey, maybe quite flat, but there's plenty of character in those clouds. So actually you might be shooting all day, but there could be bright. So often to get a long enough exposure, you may need more than a 10 stop. So I typically carry a 10 and a 15 with me. And I usually use the screw-in type because I've only got a couple of lenses that I'll perhaps be carrying with me. So it's more convenient to use a screw-in type filter for that.
Yeah. I think that's a great point you made about all day shooting, especially by the coast and especially if you're thinking in black and white. It really is a great way, as Adrian's alluded to there, to get just a huge amount of shooting time out of your day. And as tides come in and out, as we've also mentioned, it can make a big difference, And yes, Ralph, I'll try and keep the mouse still. Apologies, I'm multitasking screens here, but I'll do my best for you. So let's just move on, because you mentioned about this side of the bay, and obviously you've got the large boulders here, but you also mentioned that as you go around the there's this. I mean, size-wise, what are we looking at here?
These are big. So these are probably 1 to 2 foot in diameter. I guess, big boulders. So they're really, you know, architectural. They're beautiful, and yeah, and some of them, you know, beautifully shaped, and so there's great opportunity for fine work. So actually, I do take quite a lot of portrait format images for my landscapes. You know, almost more than I would do landscape, and it particularly works well with the wide angle lenses. Just gives you that huge depth. Being able to shoot from, you know, from close up, and also include in sky, which is you know, a critical part, particularly with if you've got a bit of cloud as we have here.
And if you are, yeah, if you're using those wide angle lenses and shooting portrait, the size of this foreground could suddenly start to feel quite exaggerated, can't it? Which is a nice thing to play with from a perspective point of
I
view.
Absolutely. I mean, I enjoy that a lot. Exaggerating perspective is something that I just love it. In architectural work, you know, it take it to the extreme. So you know, a very large, you know, wide angle lens like like my 12 millimeter, you know, this thing, particularly for architecture, is fantastic because it really opens up the view. It allows you you can pack in more in. But you know, I was a little bit unsure about whether this kind of wide angle lens would be too much for landscape, that you would just lose everything. But you know, as you can see here, it's just a case of moving yourself around and finding a different angle, a different perspective, a different point of view, and that exaggerated perspective can be fantastic.
Now, Adrian, we're going to get into an edit in a moment, aren't we, as well? We're going to have a little look at something. And
Yeah.
I think it's good for us to say that we're now going into slightly hot topic area, only because we know people have lots of different feelings about where they could be on the line of editing, post-processing versus in the field, etc., etc., etc. So I'm really happy that we're going to get into it and kind of spark a conversation on that, perhaps a little bit as well. And I think, like you said, black and white maybe does let us be a little bit more expressive in that. But I know there's a particular image we want to get to. So what we're going to do you want to pick the screen share up here and we can do that?
Yeah, I can do that now. Yeah, so a little bit further around the coast, we would be finding some dunes. We haven't quite got there yet, but if we did, then you know, we might find some dunes, and the dunes work particularly well in infrared, actually. So I thought this was quite an interesting image because it kind of brings up a topic of infrared as well. So the infrared photography, I find works especially well in early in the season and later on in the season as well. But most people maybe think of infrared as being a summer activity, but I would say almost the contrast is too high in the summer, and that the delicate sort of surfaces of particularly foliage tend to burn out somewhat. So this is you know, a pretty typical infrared image of a flower and a dune, and so the image, because it's been shot as a raw image, comes in as a, you know, pink, because we've basically stripped out the color from the other sensors. So now the problem with an image, with an infrared image, quite often is, you know, the exposure is quite low, and you need to keep it low because you're really only using 1 out of the 4 pixels in your camera. You know, you've got red, green, blue, green. You know, you've got double the number of greens, so you end up with just the red pixels. You've only got really a quarter of the light catching ability for your camera. So you need to be careful not to try to push your exposure right the way up, because you could saturate those sensors in trying to achieve a higher exposure. So typically they look a bit thin, they look a bit weak, they're lacking in contrast. So I'm just going to I'm going to jump straight into black and white initially, and then really all I'm going to do is just stretch the histogram out. So I'm not going to try to shift the relationships in tones, I'm just going to stretch the histogram, and that'll inject a bit of contrast. So I'm just going to pull down the blacks, and I'll pull it down until it's close to touching the bottom of the histogram. I'll do the same with the whites. And what we have to watch for, particularly with the whites, is as we move that whites, it will burn out as soon as we go too far, but you'll see that it does slow down somewhat before it hits the end of the buffer, and the shape of the histogram is changing in the top half here. And that shape changing is a clue that we're losing detail in the image. And so as these pixels are kind of piling up, if you like, they're becoming the same brightness values, and therefore they're merging. So you won't be able to see any detail when that happens. So the idea is not to go too far with that, but to certainly to lift the overall exposure. So we've got a wider range of tones now, but it's promising, but not quite there. I'm just going to have a look at the flower here. There's detail in the leaves here, which is interesting, but there's not enough contrast for my likings. Also, just sense a touch. We're just touching the highlights here, so we're just getting a little warning there that we're right on the edge. And then the next thing is contrast, overall contrast. For me, though, it isn't just about playing the contrast slider here. If we play with that contrast slider, we won't see any differentiation in these highlights because they're all in a very similar area of the histogram. So instead, I'm going to inject contrast using the dehaze. And the dehaze, what the dehaze does is maintains the highlights. You can see with the histograms moving to the left, it's maintaining the highlights, but it's bringing some beautiful depth into the image. And I really like that kind of power in an image like this. And then we may then need to just watch out for our highlights. So we can either try and bring those back in with the highlight slider, but that tends to be too heavy. I might just go in with my adjustment brush and then locally manage those highlights, maybe a little bit of whites, we'll bring that back in. There isn't really much in the way of detail going on here anyway, so they need to sit at the top. We don't want to make them grey, so they do need to sit up in the high end. But now I've got an image I'm feeling quite comfortable with. Now, the depth of black in the sky, maybe it's a little bit too dark and oppressive. If that's the case, and I might just lift the sky a little bit. But I could still add a little bit of texture in there at the same time. So I might just have to watch out for the black element there. But there is actually some really interesting textural elements coming out there, and Clarity is good at pulling that out. In this case, that's probably as far as I would go, but maybe depending on whether I want to really pull the viewer into that central section with a little bit of a vignette.
Nice.
And then that gives me a position.
Can you give us a quick before and after, Adrian? And especially I'm keen for everyone to look at this. Yeah, okay, cool.
So and if I do that, so that's to the black and white step. If we do it to, obviously the incoming picture looks like this, and when we do the before after, that's always an issue with black and white. So very often what I do is I will set the history step to the first step where I convert to black and white, and now I'm seeing the comparison. So I get a sense of how my edit is going. I can see now, whether it's gone too far, whether I've been a bit too aggressive with it. I mean, there's always the opportunity to leave the image and come back and look tomorrow, and that is great advice. And many people give that advice out, and I think that's great advice. So walk away, come back. If you still like it, it's good. But yeah. This clearly, that's quite a heavy edit. That's quite a stylized look. But it is the kind of look that I individually for my own work is what I like, and I like images with impact, and that certainly has impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's quite interesting to see, even just in a moment or two. That's not half an hour of working out. Okay, Adrian may well go and spend more time on it had it be a final image, but we wanted to just show you very briefly, didn't we, that you can do those sorts of things. And actually, from a print point of view, just very briefly before you throw it back at me on the screen, presumably as long as you're keeping everything within histogram detail-wise, there's no issues with being a little bolder on, say, the dehaze and the blacks and the whites.
Yeah, there can be. The print will be different. So the print will have a point where it can't get any blacker, but the image may have depth beyond that. So on screen, you may see detail in the darkest elements, but on paper, that differentiation may be lost. And that may be because the ink paper combination, particularly if using matte papers, simply can't get as black. You could, of course, use a different paper choice and go for more of a gloss or semi-gloss type paper. That will allow you to reach a deeper black with more detail. But if not, if you prefer a matte look, then you may well edit the image to be more suitable for printing, and that would involve just lifting the bottom end of the histogram so that it matches the depth of the black that you can produce on paper.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And Adrian, on some of his trips, will spend time going through editing and preparing for print as well. And there are also separate things that we do workshop wise to help people with that. But thanks for just kicking that back, everybody. Hope you did enjoy that. And we are now going different location, and again we've got a little color one, but we're just going to talk through a few at this particular location, right?
Yeah, so this is also Lee Bay, but not the same Lee Bay. So this is further down. We head down further west along the coastline. We pass by Ilfracombe, maybe stop off for an ice cream or something like that. Ilfracombe's a lovely old holiday town on the north coast, with a little port, but and several other interesting beaches around it. We haven't got time to visit tonight, but this one I would have to say, Lee Bay is one of my favourite of the bays in this section. It again is very compact. I've shown in colour here. The tides and the storms often bring up kelp and some interesting foreground elements, which quite often we'll go here, and all we'll do is use a macro lens and look at tiny shells, and some of the other features of the rock here are beautiful. So yeah, just looking across, so that's looking in an easterly direction. The little house on the corner there, that's it used to be available to hire actually, and it may still be, but I think it was being renovated last time I was there. But that side of the bay is really interesting. You can just get along to the next bay along at low tide. But yes, that foreground is fabulous. So this would have been after a storm. It just throws up the most amazing kelp and seaweed with just fantastic colours and all sorts of things, and unfortunately some string and various other bits of fishing line and so on coming in there too. But the next week you go down there and there'll be nothing. It's quite amazing. So it can be quite a surprise when we get there. As I say, but very often you'll see a lot of tiny colourful shells of all sorts of different sorts. It's a wonderful place. The rocks themselves are very beautiful, and in fact there's a big seam of pink quartz that runs through the beach, and that throws up lots of quartz and pink quartz pebbles, not just here on this bay, but also in some of the other bays just nearby. So Ilfracombe Beach actually has a pretty good seam of pink quartz as well, which some of the pebbles there are really rather lovely. But yeah, so there's plenty of interest here, which translates very well into black and white. You know, we're looking at textures, we're looking at form, we're looking at lines, looking at leading lines, looking at all kinds of other structural elements that really work particularly well in black and white. So the fact that there's some nice colour there as well is less of an issue. But
we had to appeal to the crowds there. Actually, just if I can just pick you up, you know, when you find these very busy scenes, especially where the colour is such a kind of riotous addition, you know, do you play with those in black and white, or do you sometimes just decide no, the color is part of the scene here?
It's a really interesting point, because you know, a lot of people think that if we're shooting for black and white, that the color isn't that important. Actually, it's almost the opposite. The more color in an image, the more opportunity there is to differentiate elements within the picture when we come to work in black and white. The raw image is always color underneath, and you can pick out shades and tones of grey and play with them individually by playing with the sliders and the black and white panel. So actually, the more colour there is, the more opportunity there is to add contrast, add interest, and play with those individual tones. So certainly, it would be interesting. An image like this, probably the colour harmony and the interesting, you know, the chaos in colour is a really strong point for this picture, but it doesn't mean that it wouldn't work in black and white. And I think actually this one would work very well in black and white. Maybe just picking out the subjects to focus in on.
Yeah, cool. Just quick question from Alistair. What do you use to protect your tripod legs if you're at the sea edge, if at all?
Nothing. Yes. Yes. And I think there are some other photographers out there who spend a lot more time in the water than I do, and replace those things on a regular basis. It seems that they're really not designed for that job. So, you know, it would be interesting, depending on the kind of shutter speeds you're using. If you're using, you know, maybe very short shutter speeds, maybe in the order of half a second or less, you could probably get away with the gimbal, actually. You could use, you know, you could probably keep the camera steady enough using some kind of gimbaling device. And that would be worth experimenting with if you're fed up of buying another tripod every year.
Yeah, it's a painful one, isn't it? That my only tip on that is make sure you get a tripod that you can take apart easily, and then every night you can strip it, shower it, and leave it
Yeah,
while you go for your dinner. That's my top tip on tours.
yeah.
But you look like a lunatic just stripping your tripod down in your hotel room. Uh, if we get back into the black and white, I
Yes.
pierced your eyes there, Adrian, with two color ones. I'm very
Yeah.
sorry I made you put them in, but this is just the other side, isn't it?
It
Which is only
is.
really accessible at low tide, I presume.
That's right. Yeah. So you can walk around here. So this is on the western side of the bay, and at low tide, low to medium tide, you can wander around into this bay, which tends to be a little bit less frequented. Although, as you can see, we don't really have a huge problem with overflowing beaches in North Devon, not so much as South Devon or Cornwall. And this bay is rather lovely, actually. It has some cliffs which are quite interesting. They have caves within them, has some wonderful coloured rocks, which we haven't got pictures of here. But you can start to see the structures of the rocks, the way that they fold and the way that they're cut, if you like. And this is just, it's a lovely little bay, a lovely little peaceful bay. There is a exit out the other side. You can get back up onto the cliffs there, and you come down that way too, but it's a little bit less accessible. So it's a nice little extra that adds to Lee Bay.
Yeah. And as we get into this change of location, I'm going to ask you to explain that. We're now getting into the really big, wide open sort of beaches. And actually, if you give us a very just quick geographical thing of that, then I kind of want to get into dealing with those big open spaces if we can photographically.
Yeah, so we have kind of three really big beaches, sandy beaches. We have this one actually is Saunton Sands, which is just coming up to the estuary, the Tor and Torridge estuary exits. It's about 3 to 4 miles long, 3.5, 4 miles long. But if we, as we were coming from Lee Bay, we would have passed by Woolacombe and also Croyd. And Woolacombe is as big, it's another 3 mile long beach. Croyd is a bit more compact. But all three of them, including this one, have dune systems flanking them as well, which I absolutely love, and they're particularly good for infrared. But black and white, I think they work rather well. The dune system here, Braunton Burrows, is the centre of the North Devon biosphere, as it's called. So it's Braunton Burrows and Lundy itself offshore from here, 12 miles offshore, kind of at the centre of the biosphere, and then that sort of spreads out around to pick up basically the whole of the North Devon coastline. But Braunton Burrows itself is a triple SI site, and you can wander through the dunes there. It was used for D-Day landing practice as well, so there's usually a reunion on an annual basis where they bring down half-track vehicles and all sorts of things, and they land Hercules aircraft on the beach and so on. So it's a really dramatic location. And in fact, at the far distant, we can't quite see it in this. The far distance, there is a hotel on the cliff there, which is the Saunton Sands Hotel, and that's the location where we will stay when we come and do the North Devon coast tours.
So, just from the point of view, and we sort of touched on it with wider lenses as well. So, I've been on some of these beaches here and in various places, and sometimes you can walk out and the sheer size of it and the flatness and at first you think, well, there is nothing, and now we both know there's not nothing, but you can feel a little featureless, and sometimes people like to grab hold of a feature to sort of build up a composition around it. But so in terms of that width and that size, do you kind of embrace that by going even wider, perhaps? Is that a nice way to embrace the size?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Yes, it is one of the techniques you can use. Certainly, is to literally turn it into two sections of an image of sky and a foreground of some sort. Lose the detail of the waves maybe into strips of water, strips of white, and so on. So it can be. Equally, if you go portrait, you can build in a huge amount of interest in the foreground and still get in some sky and the water as well. So wide can work, and obviously swapping over to something longer, medium telephoto, maybe even a favourite that I have, a portrait lens, can work very well too, or macro, so 80, 90 millimeter, something like that, can be really good. And then you've got the detail on the beach, the sand patterns here. I guess this one I think is probably 16 mil, I'm guessing. So I think the sand patterns, the water patterns here are really interesting. So wandering around, and that's the way to solve it is just to potter about and see what transpires. But here we're at the far end, and the estuary is just exiting and joining the sea, so you get a really interesting turbulence, and the water swirls and it creates really wonderful sand patterns actually in this area. It's also quite dangerous, or can be dangerous, because you can get cut off. You wander along a section of sand only to be cut off from behind. So, but the beach here at Saunton is incredibly slowly shelving, so you can literally walk out a mile or so at low tide, and you know, walk back with the tide as it's coming in. It's quite an amusing thing to do.
Nice.
And actually standing in the water, you know, finding yourself with your wellies, or without your wellies, actually just letting that water come in, and then point your camera back at the land. You know, that can be a nice alternative view as well.
Yeah, there's a little ambiguity there as well, isn't it? If you're within the water, the viewers immediately think, hang on a minute, how did he get there? But I like, yes, using this excellent texture and detail in the foreground, and it just sweeps beautifully up away into the distance. There's a quick question about shutter speed. I presume that question is about this image, not as opposed to what is shutter speed generally, which is a different answer. But obviously shutter speed, playing with shutter speed, you can capture some of that movement, can't you? And often it's about just matching the mood of what you're trying to get at the time, and how quickly the clouds might be moving, how quickly the water might be moving.
Yeah, definitely. And in this case, actually, it looks like a relatively short shutter speed, but I've just quickly had a look at it, and it's actually 13 seconds. So it's a relatively long shutter. So clearly planted in my tripod into the water here, and managed to keep it steady enough for long enough without it sinking into the sand slowly, which is a common problem with the wet sand. But yeah, so that's just given me a little bit of movement in the sky. And I'm guessing that, looking at the data, that I would have liked it to be longer, but it was too bright, clearly, for the filter that I had at the time. There is a neat trick you can do, actually, which, just not to digress too far, but if you do find that situation, so that's a 13-second exposure, take another one, and another one, and another one. And then you can combine them using exposure stacking in Photoshop. So you can bring them into Photoshop as 4 individual images, put them into a smart object, and then use a smart object stack mode to mean out the values. And then you'll get the equivalent of a single shot of 2, 3, 4 times that length.
The tips are coming strong and fast, everybody. So I hope everybody kept up with that one. That's a neat one. That's a neat one. That get you out of trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And give you another option if it is just so bright. There's a couple we just wanted to touch on, kind of vistas and close-ups as well, didn't we here?
Yeah, so this looking out towards Heartland, so the far distant there would be the Heartland Point probably, and the bays, which is where we would be heading around. Yeah, I mean, it's the North Devon coast. It faces west. It's beautiful, and sunsets like this are not uncommon. And I can see one going on right now. So it's going to be like that out there. In fact, in February we did a North Devon in black and white, and I had to kind of apologise to the group. We had a lovely group, and because we had such a spectacular sunset, and we were doing black and white, but people were sneakily trying to take colour pictures, even though they were taking colour pictures. The raw file's always colour, but they're kind of sneakily switching back to colour to take their pictures. But yeah, sand patterns. So this is maybe an answer to your earlier question, which is, well, you're faced with that huge beach. What do you do? Some of the beaches are particularly good for this kind of detail, which the way that the water moves and the silt and the sediment on the beach tends to create rather lovely little patterns in the sand, which they can work very nicely in colour or black and white.
Yeah, this is absolutely up my street, but I will keep us honest.
Triangles.
Triangles, exactly. I just see mountains and I'm happy.
Yeah.
But no, it's good. Yeah. And this is why in this particular area, there's this great ability to have variety, as we've already said a couple of times here, with big, wide, sandy things, pebbly rocks, big rocks, all sorts of stuff. I'm going to just keep us moving just for time, but it's quite possible we might run a few minutes longer tonight, if that's okay with everyone, because we're going to do another edit, quick edit as well. So if everyone out there is happy with that, that's good as well. We use this one as the kind of header image, Adrian, or I picked it out just to use as a thing, because for me it was it was a really great example of black and white giving this sort of tumultuous and textured feel. And I just love what's going on up here in the clouds as well. And obviously we're sort of within the dune system here, correct?
Yeah. So this is right in the middle of the well, the bottom end actually of the Braunton Burrows in the dune system, and the boardwalk which takes you out to the beach. And in fact, right at the end of the boardwalk, the headland in the distance there is Heartland Point again. So it spreads out left and right. You can walk in most of the areas of the dunes. You can get into that and just wander off and find yourself a little bit of small sandy duney area to play with all afternoon. This actually boardwalk comes from a point called Crow Point, and Crow Point is sort of the end of where the estuary meets the end of Saunton, and that in itself is really interesting. It's got some really interesting things going on in the sand, and the way that the land has kind of crept into the sand and crept into the water, and it is really very interesting. I don't have any pictures here, but again, it's one of my favourite little places to head to. So this is if you walk down the end of the boardwalk, turn right, you've got a 3-mile walk up to Saunton Sands Hotel and the car park there, and you can walk all the way around and down the dune system back the other way. So it's that's a really rather lovely route to do. A good day's worth just on its own, I think.
Yeah, you just put me out here for a day. I'd be happy, to be honest. But
yes.
Just one point I wanted to pick up on, which is to do with in the field shooting and seeing, because people ask a lot of times about how we might see in black and white, and how can they improve that black and white seeing vision, whatever you want to call it. So one thing I talk about, and I know you talk about, because we both use mirrorless, is actually shooting with black and white in the live view and in the viewfinder as well, which you can do on mirrorless. So can you just expand a little bit about that, and obviously dispel some of the worries people might have about what they might be doing to the RAW or the JPEG, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, the really nice thing when you're shooting with RAW is that the RAW is just what comes off the camera sensor. So there's nothing you can do with the settings, with your picture modes or anything like that will change the RAW capture. The RAW capture is the RAW capture, end of story. When we bring it into your developing software, we then want to convert that to black and white to work on. But you don't have to worry in camera about what you do with the camera. But it's very valuable to change the camera to operate as in black and white when you're looking through it. And the way you can do that is by selecting the black and white mode. It might be a picture mode or something like that, where you might get landscape or portrait in there. You might find black and white. If you can, and you have mirrorless, then you can see the world in black and white in real time, which is really wonderful for being able to more easily spot the leading lines, the form, the textures, composition. And in fact, it's a great tip for people learning photography in color, is to switch the camera to black and white, because it takes away the complexities of color and leaves you with the more basic features to work with composition. So I do that all the time, but most cameras' black and white conversion is fairly unflattering. It's gray, basically. So I also would advise that you find, if you can, and you're lucky and you're able to, adjust the parameters of the black and white mode. Hopefully you can push the contrast up. In my camera, I've got a sharpness control and a contrast control, and I typically put my sharpness onto 2 out of 3, or contrast, sorry, on 2 out of 3, and sharpness goes to maybe 1 out of 3, maybe 2 out of 3. What that does then is it kind of heightens the contrast in the viewfinder, and it's more exciting. Really kind of see what's going on. You don't have to worry about whether you're clipping your highlights, because you've done that, because it doesn't impact the RAW at all. What you do need to remember is that your histogram is of that modified image. So your histogram is only the histogram of the JPEG and not of the RAW. So you'll probably have quite a bit of extra headroom when it's perhaps you've got some blinkies on the screen showing that the clouds have clipped. You're probably 2 or 3 stops away from that happening to the RAW file. So best thing is to do a little experiment and do some shots to test that.
Yeah.
And you'll know where you'll be able to go.
Fab. Yeah, lots of good advice in there. I hope everyone was paying attention. And with that sort of question in mind, I'm actually just going to put another one of our polls up, which is whether you shoot in black and white in the field. So the question is, do you capture in black and white? And depending on the device, and for those watching live, They should hopefully be able to see the poll. That should pop up in a minute. And the question is, do you capture in black and white? And we mean, do you capture at the time in black and white? Do you use those black and white modes on your camera? I'm really interested to see if people do or don't, or whether that's something they come to later. And whilst we let people vote on that, Adrian, another one of my faves, this is very dreamy, and I absolutely adore, like major adore going on here, this beautiful line just coming in here. So tell us, obviously we've seen the wider shot of the dunes, but when you're deep within them, and there's kind of an infrared kind of light luminosity field going on here.
This absolutely is. This is actually a panorama stitch of 3 shots done in infrared, and yes, indeed, it's got that kind of creaminess and dreaminess that, in the old days it used to be perhaps a bit noisier, but the good old Kodak high-speed infrared was really lovely in having some interesting problems because it was recording infrared light. They weren't able to make very good anti-halation coatings that worked in the infrared, so it meant that the highlights would glow a little, and in some cases glow a lot. And so what I've done with the processing here is to kind of give that feel back to the image, working with some layers in Photoshop to achieve that.
Okay, and that might be one for another day, people, in terms of how it's done. But I think it's nice to see that black and white, as you know and as you use, can be quite high contrasty like that. It can also sit quite high key, and it can sit quite dark. I'm going to just shut the results down on that one. So 69% of you do not capture live in black and white in the field, and that is an interesting one. And I would encourage you, if you have that facility within your camera, and anyone can help you hopefully find that, or you can find that after the fact, to really do that. And Adrian actually made a great point. Sorry I'm hijacking this, Adrian, but I really love that point, because it's something occasionally I talk about. If you're shooting in color, sometimes it's good just to flick it to black and white so that you can actually really concentrate on the shapes within your frame. Now here, this is another beautiful shot within the dunes. So is this a toning effect, Adrian, or?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, just a warm, soft tone, just added again later on. It was shot with, say, one of my other favorite lenses. So this was a macro lens. So it's a 90mm f2.8 will be shot at f2.8. So it's got that lovely softness to it. It's again, that sort of dreamy quality, which I really rather like. And you're just finding a small element of it that's sharp, but really that's not the most important part, probably, I guess. So I quite like that sort of nothingness in a way that is rather lovely, the softness.
And actually, if anyone saw the chat with Sue Bishop last week, that was a technique she was talking about with shooting wide open and with the wildflowers in Switzerland. And actually, if you didn't see that and you joined us this week, if you after this, you can go to the Facebook Lightland/live on the Lightland page, and you'll see all the live streams that we've done. But I will keep us moving again, just from a time point of view. We're now in, when I first saw this, I said to you, I see thousands of seals.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so this is Westward Ho. So again, this is actually this is another iPhone shot, panorama, stitch panorama. These boulders are big. This is sort of kind of twice the size of a medicine ball, I guess. And the boulders down at the Pebble Ridge at Westward Ho have, many of them have these quartz streaks through them. So they really can be really beautiful. And I think it had been raining, so these are wet from the rain. This area actually is an interesting area because it has this great section of big boulders that at one end of the beach, and that kind of protects the land behind there. But that kind of breaking down these days, and so I think this is an area that's going to find itself underwater much more regularly. It's a golf course there, I think, at the moment, but that kind of floods in winter. So it's going to be, I think, one of those areas that will eventually be reclaimed by the sea.
I wanted to the point I really wanted to make on this one as well was it's about detail, isn't it? It's about just being aware, and it would be very easy just to go down there and feel the expanse and take the shot, but it's having the awareness to just find this beautiful bit of interest down here, and being that's the place where you set up and make the shot.
Yeah, and really, I mean, Westward Ho has a lot to offer. It has this great expanse of Pebble Ridge, and as you can see, one person in the distance. It's not exactly overflowing, but it is one of the busier beaches. But they're so big, you can find space. It's got those opportunities. The boulders, the size of the boulders are such that you can find compositions just playing amongst the boulders, and you could, I say, you spend all day there. But if you did, then you'd miss the other two or three parts that make the beach up, which further down the sea pool, which we'll see in a second, and the sandier sections, and also in rougher weather. Yeah, so this is a lovely concrete sea pool, really simple, and I just love that simplicity of the geometry against the sort of the random rugged rocks around. And this time we're looking in the other direction, so we're looking east. The headland on the right hand side is the bay where we come from, so that will have been Lee Bay out there. And kind of swept our way round the bay, where the other side of the estuary now, from Barnstable, we would have come over the big modern bridge and crossed to the western coast. So we're heading now towards Heartland, the rugged Heartland that maybe people are a little bit more familiar with, and Clovelly, of course, another very famous element of the north coast.
We've had a few come and join us as well. We are in North Devon, as we've been mentioning, and Adrian's talking us through a lot of his black and white images. And just before we do move on from this location, Adrian, I wanted to pick up on this particular one because we talked about shape and leading people in. And, something, if anyone has been watching all of these series that we've talked about, coordinating shapes and repetition comes in, and similarities, I like to call it. We've got these beautiful, lovely V's going on. And this is, again, we're pretty wide here, Adrian, and you're kind of embracing that
Totally.
stretch.
Yeah, in a way, this is my kind of architectural, shooting buildings like this. This is a 12mm lens, which goes on my Sony full frame. So that's pretty wide. Although now everybody with an iPhone has got one of these lenses too. So you should be able to get out there and shoot exactly this. So it's getting that balance of, I guess, exaggerating perspective. It's just, for me, I just enjoyed that. There's a great sky going on. Interestingly, the woman that's swimming there is, I went and had a chat with her. She was okay for me to take some pictures. And she'd lived in Westward Ho for 15 years and never been in the sea pool. So that was the day to go in for her.
Oh, wow.
It was quite interesting. But yes, the contrast is what it's all about. And that foreground contrast in the concrete is amazing, but maybe a little bit too much, perhaps drawing my eye a little bit more away. But the bold white line around the pool is, that's the star. It sort of grabs your attention from the out, and then you kind of wander off and start exploring all this craggy concrete and so on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that white line. Those white lines, sorry, absolutely
Yeah.
pulls you right in. And actually, weirdly, I see a head and a body up here as if it's just peering down into the pool. But I do see strange shapes, everybody. I apologize for that. A quick question has come in just whilst I go on to the next shot, Adrian. But the question was what the aperture on the boulder shot. So I think 2 or 3 shots before. I don't know if you have that data on you.
Yeah, let's have a
He
look.
looks for that.
Well, that was from the Westward Ho boulders. Was that? Yeah. So because that was a composite with an iPhone, f1.8, would you believe? But of course, the depth of field on an iPhone, would be bonkers. So it's a tiny sensor, so you just get that massive depth of field. So it feels like it's infinite depth of field, but yeah, how about that? f1.8.
There you go. There's a mind bender for you.
Yeah.
But yes, let's jump because we're going to do another quick edit here. And this particular area is in and around Heartland, and it's a very it's a crazy kind of place, isn't it?
Yes.
But do you want to jump us in and take us on the quick edit?
Yeah. So this is Blackchurch Rock, and Blackchurch Rock is well known in the area. So it's just beyond Clovelly and to just before you get to Heartland. So we're starting with that. So a fairly unpromising grey flat day, really, and to be fair, could have done a better job with composition on this one, but I thought I would take this as an example because I think it highlights for me what I like out of the process. I enjoy working with my computer. I used to enjoy sitting in a darkroom playing with making images. So I don't find that spending time with the computer is something I shouldn't do. It's something I really enjoy doing, and I do a lot of. But to get from where we started to a black and white image, we'll do that. So just immediately go into black and white. straight away. So I don't bother playing with the colors in an image before converting to black and white. I know some people do. I don't find really the need to do that, I suppose. The sky is gone. The question is there anything really in that sky? So I might just bring the exposure down a little, and I can see that detail is arriving from there. If I go all the way down, you can see that's all differentiated, that sky. So there is stuff there. So what I would probably do is grab my favorite tool to bring that out. And why do I use dehaze? And dehaze in color is really destructive because it pushes, I mean, you could say it's really destructive in black and white too, but I enjoy the effect. It pushes the, if you look at the histogram, pushes the histogram to the left, but look what's happening to the highlights. The highlights are staying there and just distributing. So what's happening is it's spreading out that detail and creating visible detail now in the sky, which was before just all whited out. If I bring the overall exposure down somewhat, we can really start to see that there's something very lovely in that sky. Didn't look promising to start with, but for sure there's something very promising going on there. So having brought that down, I've lost everything in the foreground rock. So so I'm going to just go and push something back into this foreground rock. So my favorite tool for doing local adjustments would be the radial filter, but it's just not the right tool for this job. So what I'm going to do is just use take advantage of the auto mask in this case. I don't often use auto mask, but because the contrast is so extreme here, I can reasonably do that and make a selection of the rock itself so that I can bring some of that detail back. The other thing I think I saw when I was taking this picture, I mean, this is a well-known location and it's taken a lot, and I've seen some really beautiful pictures of this done in color. But less people take it for black and white. I'm just going to do this. Now here I'm just going to fill in the middle. You'll notice that not everything is getting picked up by the brush, and that's because I'm in auto mask mode, so sometimes I have to go over it a few times. Or not, it's where contrast is existing within here. If you use something like Capture One, you can do a very neat way of filling in the insides of that once you've selected it. So I've made a mask now, so now I can bring back this rock, which has been darkened. Well, because it's been darkened, because I used a global adjustment for dehaze, which was rather a bold thing to do, I can actually bring back that detail by just undoing that dehaze in that area. So just by reducing the dehaze, effectively undone it locally in that area. What it does come back with is that it's rather flat, so I'll introduce some contrast into the rocks, and then maybe the highlights just need to be tailed off a little bit. So we can bring back something. Now what I've got in this image is I want to see some detail in these rocks, but there's something about these leading lines, and that they are such an important part of this location. So I just want to go in and do something with those as well. So I'm just going to reduce the size of my brush, take off the auto mask. These ridges that proceed out into the water and are really lovely, they catch the light, and you can sort of see that they are catching the light here somewhat. So all I'm going to do is just help those along a little bit and bring them up, because they are like fingers. They're almost like the fingers on. It feels to me like this is some kind of creature, something really interesting creature, and we're just going to bring out a little bit more emphasis on these and just bring out the detail that was there, but just help to lift that up a little bit. I might also need to just raise this area here a little bit, so I'm just going to separately raise that area a little bit there and just get that to match a bit. Now this sky still isn't really performing for me at the moment, so I think what I might need to do is just give that a little bit more of a tweak. So I'll do that by bringing up the radial filter and making sure that the radial filter is working on the outside, and then I can just increase the drama in that area a little bit more, maybe a little bit of clarity. Now the problem with the kind of things that I'm doing here is that the image can, when we do manipulations, and I'm doing some quite extreme manipulations, we can get some side effects. So halos and so on might appear on the ridgeways. And if they are bad, but you like the effect and you want to keep the effect, you don't want the halos, then we can fix that in Photoshop. So there is a lovely way to fix the halos if we have that issue. So I've now got an image that's got somewhat more impact than where I started. I'm going to need to perhaps just pick up on a couple of areas that are a little bit over bright now. So I'm going to just take down the highlights and the whites in those areas so we don't deepen the shadows anymore. I might use that same brush in a couple of areas just to stop you from wandering too far off the path. And then, so I might just lift these fingers up a little bit more just to kind of make the point. But the sky is often fabulous, but rarely comes out that way in the raw shot. The raw shot is unflattering, it's unpromising, but actually within the picture there's real possibilities to just explore different avenues.
Yeah, good man. Thank you, Adrian. I think hopefully with these you've seen that possibilities are there, even if you don't see some of those possibilities in the files, as Adrian has been mentioning. And this actually is the final image. And what's great is images you can take and edit and come back and redo lots of different ways as well. But I think location-wise, and actually just whilst we're here, I'm going to ask a quick question out there to the viewers, and thank you all for staying with us. We're going to tick over just a few more minutes before Adrian's parking runs out on this live stream. But would you guys be keen to see more of us doing how-to edits or maybe even editing your images and our images? I'm really keen to know if you would like that, because if you would, we will try and do something. Basically, you guys have the power. We want to keep you entertained and engaged, and we're happy to do anything you want to do. So let me know. I think I know the answer already. But whilst I leave that poll up, so this is a poll. If you're watching live on certain devices, you will see that poll. I'm afraid not all of you will see it. Apologies, but I'll tell you results in a minute. Adrian, just tell us, because this could be it's the lost world. I'm calling it that, all right?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's 180 degrees from where we were just looking. So directly behind me is Black Church Rock and these rivers of rock heading out into the sea. And that's the day that we had. It was overcast, it was raining, there was a little waterfall coming off the hillside in there, and we're looking towards Heartland Point. So we haven't even made it to Heartland yet. So we ran out of pictures, never mind. Honestly, there are so many possibilities on the North Devon coast. I think I started to make a collection in my Lightroom, smart collection for each of the beaches that I would visit, and I ended up stopping at 40. And I haven't visited them all yet, but we're enjoying them. So this is Heartland. So this is a classic view looking out, 12mm lens again, leading lines heading out into the sea, low tide. So when the tide comes in there, it can get a bit dodgy. You have to watch out where you are. But yeah, it's got a lot of the coast here has these rivers of rock that head out into the sea. So they make great foils for black and white images.
Yeah. And just so I'm keeping us moving, everyone, sorry, because we joke about time, but literally Adrian and I could go on all night, but we can't. Would you like to see more how-to edits in the future? 100% yes, from those who saw the poll. Lots of people who couldn't see the poll, presumably making comments in the comments box, which is great. That's a great way.
Good.
And lots of people saying yes, please, to some editing help. And I think I just want to very briefly just hit on the last couple of images, Adrian. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I always enjoy working with you. It's always good fun. This is a location I came to with you because I was doing a bit of background stuff for Light on Land. And it's really weird because there's this waterfall kind of literally just coming straight into the sea pretty much. But again, another example of the variety, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the shot before is the beach below. So this, that's what happens when you get down onto the beach. So it is fabulous. This is just beyond Heartland. It's probably about a 40-minute walk from Heartland Quay along the coast path, which is fantastic. And then you get to this quite big waterfall actually, and there's another smaller waterfall below. But these big headlands and these big cliffs around it. It's lovely. And the day I took this was a very average flat day again, but good old Lightroom can really pull something out. So it's all about, for me anyway, it's all about maybe deciding what's the important bit in here. And I think, you know, could go around editing this in different ways and pulling out different elements, but the waterfall is the main part of this. Yeah, a lovely bit of coastline.
And just as we flick to what's coming next, thank you for all the comments coming in. Yes, look, we will do something about the editing. Adrian runs editing workshops for Light and Land as well, talking about Lightroom, Photoshop, and black and white processing. So do check out his page on the Light and Land website, the tutors page. If you look for Adrian's, you'll see his and everything he does. But online, we will happily try and do a couple of little things on here on the Facebook live stream. And if there's anything else we can do an online course on, we may look into that as well. Obviously, the world's changed a little, so we will try and adapt to that as well. But Adrian, a huge thanks, mate, because it's always great to chat with you. And I hope we've opened some eyes about how black and white and shooting in that way, and also developing in that way, is a creative avenue that people can explore, right, and take in whatever way they wish to.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you need to explore it. You need to go too far to know where too far is. You know, how much cream can you have on your you know, cream tea? Yeah, I've explored that. I know where the limit is on that, but you don't know where the limit is till you pass it. So I think I would heartily encourage people to explore that avenue and go too far, find out what the problems are, come back a little bit maybe, but it will form part of your future personality as a photographer, I think. And you pick up all sorts of things along the way. So make mistakes are where the learning is.
Yeah. And actually a great thing I know Adrian does when he's out with people on the tours is he'll go through some processing and even a little bit of printing sometimes, depending on the trip, to show people really what you can get from the files. And I know if you do that, and I've seen Adrian's pupils, if you're doing that mid-tour, it then starts to affect how you're shooting in the field, and that's when it really starts to get interesting and you can really start to play with it. So yes, fab session, everybody. Lots of love coming in, to be honest, Adrian, on this one. So nice job, mate.
Okay.
Next week, again, I slammed the handbrake on photographically, and I'm taking us somewhere else in Europe, and we're going to Slovenia with Benjamin Graham, as I should call him, who is great fun. All right, we're going to have loads of fun on that one as well.
I bet you are.
Wish me luck keeping that one on time. So if you haven't been to Slovenia and/or you'd like to have fun with Ben and I talking about that, it's going to be great next week. In the meantime, just so you guys know, we are working in the background on developing this weekly series, these live streams, not just to be about tours, but also to lever in some bits about shooting, how to shoot, maybe some hot topic stuff, etc. So we will keep modulating it a little bit if you guys keep coming and watching. What really helps is if you can like and share the post, because that gets it spread out, and the more we have seeing, the more possibilities we have to do different things for you as well. So if you can do that for us, me and all the Light and Land team are much appreciative of that. Final thing, I'm just going to say sorry, and I know I'm keeping Adrian hanging on. There were a few questions about the flexibility of bookings with the current situation going on. So the team at Light and Land are very keen for you guys to know that there is absolute flexibility with any bookings that are made that allows you to reschedule and everything else. If you want the full information on that, check out the Light and Land website, and there's the COVID policy, which tells you all about that. We know it's a slightly tricky time to plan, but so we want to be flexible, and we will be as flexible as we possibly can. So if you are interested in going on something, you know, do jump on board. But tonight, I've run terribly late. I'm going to get a slap on the wrists. But from myself and Adrian, goodbye, and we shall see you all again very soon indeed.
Okay, bye-bye.